the Samyang 12mm f2 for the Fujifilm X mount, a small, lightweight, wide-angle prime lens for under $300. But is this lens worth it for landscape and astrophotography? Let's find out right now. So with the Samyang 12mm f2, I've been wanting to try this lens for a really long time, ever since I started with the Fujifilm X series system. I was a little bit hesitant at first because $300 is still a lot of money, but then when you hear that for a camera lens, you start to think, hey, that's kind of cheap for a camera lens, and the first thing that pops into your mind is budget lens. Maybe the quality isn't going to be great, and maybe I'm just throwing my $300 away. $300 that I could be using for another lens that is going to be much better than this. So I finally pulled the trigger just because, maybe I have nothing to lose. If I end up not liking it, I can just sell it again. And hopefully this video can help you out in making a decision whether or not this is something that you want to spend your money on, or if you want to use your money elsewhere on a different lens. I haven't gone out much with this lens yet, but here are a few sample shots that I've been able to take with this lens in the short time I've had it. When you open the box, you'll find the lens, the front and rear caps, a lens hood, and a nice little lens pouch. The build quality is decent. It's made of semi-hard plastic, not premium feeling, but certainly doesn't feel like it's going to just break on you with regular use. I got the black version, but it's also available in a silver finish. The mount end of the version I have is silver. It kind of looks unfinished to me, leaving it silver like that. I would have preferred it to be completely black. To me, it almost looks naked or unfinished. You can see the mount end here has no rubber gasket, so no weather sealing. Keep that in mind if that's something that really matters to you, or if you're in some kind of moist environment where condensation might play a role. The weight of this lens comes in at 260 grams, and it balances very nicely with the XT4. It's a small lens. Here it is next to one of my favorite Fuji lenses, the 23mm f2. So you can see it's not really going to take up a whole lot of room in your bag. The aperture ring has a satisfying click to it and has a solid feel when moving from stop to stop. It goes from f2 to f22 in half-stop increments. Keep in mind the lens is manual focus only, so if you're used to autofocus or you need that for faster moving situations, that is something to consider. Nevertheless, the manual focus is easy to operate using focus peaking. The focus ring provides a good amount of resistance. It feels more resistant than any native Fuji lens I've used. To me, it has a plastic feel when spinning it. Not a premium feel at all, but it doesn't really bother me. The ring has hard stops on both ends, which is nice when you compare it to those Fuji lenses that spin infinitely in both directions. You have your focus distance indicators, which you might want to use as there are no electronic connections on this lens that relay info to the focus scale on your camera screen. I don't use it too much for my own photography, as I find the focus peaking works well enough with this lens. Also keep in mind that having no electronic connections also means that the aperture data will not be recorded to your files, so you just need to go by memory or take notes if you need to know the settings. You also have to remember to set your mount adapter setting to 12mm so that the IBIS registers properly, and you also have to make sure that you have your XT4 or whatever XT camera you're using to be able to shoot without a lens. Now obviously you're not shooting without a lens, but if you don't set this properly, when you click the shutter, the camera will not take the shot. So let me show you how to do that. The first thing you need to do, go to the menu, button and dial setting, shoot without lens, and turn that function on. Image quality is surprisingly good with this lens, probably not as sharp or contrasty as the Fuji 10-24, but it is still very nice and very usable. Here's a quick non-scientific sharpness test starting with f2. You can see as we stop down, there's an increase in the sharpness until we hit the sweet spot of f5.6 to f8. I start to see diffraction kick in at about f11 and beyond. f11 seems early to me, but avoid that end if you want the sharpest images. Corner sharpness we see here starting at f2. You can see as we stop down, it does get a little bit sharper until we hit f11. Pay attention to the vignetting now. You can see f2 has quite a bit of vignetting. Stopping down does help a little bit, and any remaining vignetting you might notice, you can easily fix in post. This lens does exhibit a little bit of barrel distortion, as you might expect from a budget lens this wide. There isn't a dedicated correction profile here in Capture One. I don't think Lightroom has it either, but you can see if I apply the Zeiss 12mm 2.8 profile, I can correct the distortion. Here it is before, and here it is after. The chromatic aberration is probably the biggest downside of this lens for me. Here in this shot, you can see some purple fringing and some green fringing. It's not even a very high contrast scene where you might normally worry about chromatic aberration, but the fringing still shows up. It's correctable in post, but you can see it doesn't go away completely. Here's the before, here's the after. You'll probably have to go into Photoshop for further correction if that's something you really want to do, and you do have to keep that in mind, especially if you're processing a huge batch of photos. It's really going to slow you down in having to correct and fix all of those images with the chromatic aberration. So keep that in mind if you're shooting a ton of shots. Here's an image where I shot directly into the sun. The lens controls the flare quite nicely, and it's an easy fix in Photoshop. Check out the link in the description below if you'd like to learn how to remove lens flare in Photoshop. Now the flare in the last shot that you just saw isn't too bad because there was some cloud cover helping out. If you imagine shooting into a blue sky with no clouds helping out, of course you will get a little bit more flare, and you will see that in the next series of shots where I test the lens and how it produces sun stars. Here's a quick sample of what the sun stars look like. Here's f8, f11, f16, and f22. Not the prettiest sun stars if that's your thing, so do keep that in mind. Again, note the increase in flare in the bright midday sun. This doesn't strike me as the kind of lens you'd really want to try to get bokeh with, but nevertheless, here's a quick shot of what the background blur looks like when the subject is at arm's length distance away from the lens. Here's f2, and you can see it looks fairly smooth. Stop down to f2.8 and we get a little bit more of a hexagonal shape with these out of focus areas. Speaking of distance away from the lens, you can actually get very close to your subject with this lens. The minimum focus distance is 0.65 foot, I believe, or 0.2 meters, which allows you to get really close to your subject, making this sort of a pseudo macro lens. If you want to get some details in the landscape that you're shooting, or you just want to get up close to your subject to blur out the background a little bit more, you'll be able to do that with this lens here. Finally, we move on to astrophotography and using this lens for nighttime photography. If you're thinking about this lens, you're probably thinking of shooting the Milky Way, and I was actually able to fortunately get out and shoot a couple of shots of the Milky Way before some of the wildfire smoke started to cloud up the area and degrade the air quality. This lens is great at f2, it lets in a lot of light and the stars in the center are nice and round. My copy unfortunately does suffer from some coma and astigmatism, as you see here in the corner. If you're not familiar with these aberrations, these basically distort stars, causing them to look like elongated shapes instead of pinpoint lights. I've heard of others having better results than this, so please do keep in mind that possible lower quality control on these budget lenses might yield varying results depending on your copy. Here's f2 again, and now stopping down to f2.8 helps a little with the sharpening of the stars, but then you get this diffraction effect on bigger light points as you see on Jupiter. I like it personally, but if you want it round, stick to f2 on this lens. The best thing about this lens, as we've already pointed out, is that it's very small and lightweight, which makes it great for hiking around and not having to worry about it taking up too much room in the bag. Also, when I mount this lens on a star tracker, I don't have to counterweight the camera and the lens combination in order to get the star tracker to work properly. So being able to use that and being able to have to not lug around as much gear is a huge benefit of this lens. Now, if you'll please forgive me for just a few moments, I am going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. If you haven't shot the Milky Way with a star tracker, I do highly recommend that you pick one up, even if you don't shoot the Milky Way a whole lot. The star tracker is going to give you really much cleaner files than you would without a track shot. I can really only get about a 25-second or so exposure at the longest before I start getting star trails with the non-track shot. Plus I have to bump up the ISO to something like 3200. Maybe you use a ISO a little bit lower than that, but even if you lower it, you're probably still going to be at 1600 or ISO 2000, which adds a lot of noise. Here with the track shot, I can get a 4-minute exposure with the Samyang at f2.8 and ISO 500, which gives me a much cleaner image. Plus, with the longer exposure, we have a lot more detail to work with in the raw files. Here's an edited shot of the 25-second exposure, maybe a little bit of star trailing even at just 20 seconds, not too bad. But now let's compare that with an edited shot of the 4-minute exposure. And now compare that exposure stacked with 3 other 4-minute exposures. You can see a lot less noise, and there's so much more detail and color information that you can pull out of the edits. If you'd like to find out how I shoot and edit my Milky Way photos, make sure to click subscribe and ring the notification bell so that you'll be notified when that video is available. If you're watching this a few months after this Samyang video has been released, I'll make sure to leave a link down below, so make sure to check out the description if you want to figure out how I shoot and edit my Milky Way photos. Back to the Samyang 12mm, do I recommend this lens? When I think about it and I think about the pros and the cons, I would still say yes. Now, it's not a perfect lens and it does have some drawbacks. My copy particularly suffers from a little bit of coma and astigmatism with astrophotography. The chromatic aberration, as I mentioned, is a little bit of a problem. And again, if you are shooting large batches of photos, keep that in mind because you're going to have to do a lot more editing with this lens if chromatic aberration is something you want to remove completely from all your photographs. Now, if this were my only Fuji wide-angle lens, I probably wouldn't be worried at all. It really does provide sharp images from f5.6 to f8, which is the range where I like to shoot in. It's lightweight, it's small, it's compact, and it only weighs 260 grams, so that's always a big plus when you can have a lighter gear, a lighter weight kit with you. Are there sharper lenses out there from Fuji? Yes, the 10 to 24mm lens is sharper. It is more contrasty than the Samyang 12mm. It does have better color rendition from my experience, and it has the versatility of the zoom, giving you 15 to 36 in a full frame equivalent. It even has better coma control when you're shooting astro. But with that coma control, remember that it's at f4, which really isn't ideal for astro. And also you have to keep in mind the price. The price of the Samyang, again, under $300. Sometimes I find it for $270 when I search around there, and sometimes even less on the used market. With the 10 to 24, that's going to be at least 2 times as much for even a used copy, and up to 3 times as much if you're thinking about a new copy of the 10 to 24. So do keep price in mind. Again, it's really tough to beat the Samyang for the value that you get at such a low price. For under $300, I think the Samyang definitely makes sense as a budget lens option for the Fujifilm X-T system. Even if this isn't going to be your only lens and you're doing something like adding this to the 10 to 24 to complement that lens for your astro work, I think you'll be very happy and you won't really think about having to carry this lens because it's so lightweight, and it's not going to be much of an issue adding just this little tiny lens into your bag. So again, yes, I recommend this lens, and I would go as far as to say, especially with its budget price, that it can be a standout star for most of you out there. That was pretty cheesy, but anyhow, that's all we have on the Samyang 12mm f2. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to hit the thumbs up, click subscribe, and ring the notification bell, as it really does help to support my channel. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you soon. We've got the Samyang 12mm f2 for the Fujifilm X mount here. This is a small, lightweight, wide-angle prime lens for under $3 for the Fujifilm X mount. But is it worth it for landscape and astrophotography? Let's find out right now.